Hello, everyone. Um, I will continue applying operations to fractions. So we start with addition. Adding two fractions. Let's start with 1 over 2 plus 1/3. What will be the answer? First of all, to understand adding fractions, we need to understand a concept of common denominator. Common denominator means that the denominator of the two fractions has to be the same. So how can we get the denominator to be the same? There are many ways, one of which is just multiply these two numbers, and that will be the number that will be in the fraction. Now, let's rewrite these two fractions as fractions with 6 in the bottom. So 2 times 3. So the first one and the second one. Now what goes on the top? If we imagine to make 6 in the bottom, let's say in the first one, so to make 6 in the bottom in the first one, so we need to multiply by 3 divided by 3. And 2 times 3 here will give us 6. So the top will be just 1 times 3. So the numerator of this first one will be 3 over 6. And we could see clearly that 3 over 6 is the same as 1 over 2. Because 6 goes into 3 by a factor of 2. The same factor that 2 goes into 1. The second part of the addition, which is the 1/3, it could be rewritten as a denominator of 6 if we could multiply it by 2 over 2. So 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times 1 is 1, so the numerator will be just 2. So the answer will be, in this case, since we have a common denominator, so we could take that common denominator and we could add the numerators with no problem, so it will be 5 over 6. This is the answer for this problem, or for this addition of these two fractions. So we see that the first step is actually to get a common denominator and then to simply add the numerators with taking the denominator the same number as the common denominator. So in this case, one thing to realize that these two numbers were added to get the 5, and there's no addition for these two numbers. It's just they are in common, so we put that common denominator here. Now let's apply the same logic. Let's say if we take the next operation, which is subtraction. So subtraction, we could think about subtraction as an addition, but we turn one of the fractions into a negative number. So let's say 1/2 minus 1/3, or let me try different numbers just to make it more fun. 1/4 minus 1/6. So in this case, it's the same exact procedure as before to come up with a common denominator. A common denominator would be, in this case, if we multiply a number, these two numbers, it will be 24. But 24 might be a big number. So we could actually have the common denominator as 12, because 12 could be divided by 4 and 12 could be divided by 6. So in other words, we could come up with a common denominator to be 12. So to make this 4 into a 12, we need to multiply by 3/3. And to make this 6 into a 12, we need to multiply 2 by 2. And therefore, this fraction could be transformed into 3/12 minus 2/12, and therefore it's equal to, we take the common denominator and we do a simple subtraction. 3 minus 2, we get 1/12, and this is the correct answer for this problem. Now, the next operation is division. And in division, I would say let's do multiplication before division, because division will involve multiplication. So if we start with multiplication, so if we have two fractions, 1/3 multiplied by 1/2. So multiplication is just as simply as multiplying the numerators and multiplying the denominators. So it's 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 3 is 6. So 1/2 of 1/3 is actually 1/6. Now we go into division. Now, division does basically the opposite action of multiplication. So let's divide, let's say 1/3, or let's divide from this top problem, let's divide 1/6 into 1/3. Supposedly, if we do this, we should get 1/2 based on the previous problem. Basically, yep, we should get 1/2. So how can we do this problem? There's a rule in doing division of fractions that a division sign could be transformed into a multiplication sign, and the fraction after the multiplication, after the operation or the operator, the fraction after that needs to be flipped, meaning the numerator becomes a denominator and the denominator becomes a numerator. So in other words, it will be this 1/6 stays as 1/6 multiplied by flipping this becomes 3/1. Okay, this is the division. It's the same as multiplication by the flipped fraction, and this flipped fraction is called the reciprocal of this fraction. Reciprocal means we switch the denominator and the numerator to get this, and this is equal to 3/6, or we could think about the 6 as 3 times 2, so it is 3/3 times 2. So since we have the same number and the same multiple in the numerator and the denominator, they cancel, and in fact we get 1/2 as the desired answer that we guessed. Okay, now let's try another example that involves mixed operations, and this will seal this topic. The problem is, let's take 1/2 plus 1/4 divided by 1/3 minus 1/10. This is an interesting problem. So to do this, we need to do it part by part. Let's start with the numerator in the top. A common denominator could be chosen to be 4, because 4 could be divided by itself and 4 could be divided by 2. So we could have 1/2 times 2/2 plus 1/4. A common denominator for the bottom part. What's a number that could be divided by 3 and could be divided by 10? If we need the simplest answer would be 30. So we'll have a 30 as our common denominator. So how to make the 3 into a 30? We multiply by a 10, we divide by a 10, minus 1/10. To make it into a 30, we divide by 3 and we multiply by a 3. So we get this, this whole thing is equal to, the top will become 2/4 plus 1/4, and the denominator will become 10/30 minus 3/30, and this will equal to 2/4 plus 1/4, it's 3/4, divided by 10/30 minus 3/30, it's 7/30. Now we have two fractions divided by each other, so we could switch it into multiplication, and then so let's just rewrite it as a division. And then this is equal to 3/4 times 30/7. and the desired answer will equal to 3 times 30 is 90 divided by 4 times 7 is 28. Now both of these numbers, numerator and denominator, could be divided by 2, so we could imagine that the numerator is 90, which is 2 times 45 divided by here we get 14. 2 times 14. Now we see that the 2 could be cancelled, and the answer we get as the final fraction 45 over 14, and this is the desired answer.